Um, the issue of ethics and morality, I covered it in one of the lectures, but it's an issue that confronts us many a time. In fact, a lot of our times in our lives. How do we behave in the particular scenarios? What do we choose? Ethics is a kind of a broader science or discipline to study human behavior, of what is right and what is wrong. And morality is kind of a more personal and in-depth look at a particular form of behavior in a particular scenario. That's the broad general group, scenario. However, the two are conflated, and many a time they are used simultaneously. From an Islamic point of view, as I mentioned, that there is a kind of an inner voice, a moral intuition that we are all born with, which talk to us, which tell us what we should and we should not be doing. And that moral voice is independent of the voice of God. In other words, even if if a person is an atheist, has never heard of God, something should tell him or her that in this particular scenario, it may not give you all the details, but it may give you a very broad general outline. Indeed, in a broad sense, this is what we mean by taqwa. Taqwa is the ability to balance between the inner and the outer, because what we feel inside us should also be objectified outside us. Not only does it mean to feel the presence of the divine, but more importantly, taqwa is activating the conscious. In other words, we have a conscious which talks to us many a time. We try and kill that conscious, because by following that inner voice, we end up paying a price for it. Supposing you are walking and you find something on the floor, you wonder and you pick it up, and lo and behold, there's an envelope there with $5,000 in it. And it has the name of the person who it belongs to. And $5,000 is quite a bit of money. Do you then call that person and tell him or her, I've got your money, or do you pocket it? You know, some people will say this, some people will say this, some people will say, oh yes, I would give it back, but in reality, when the crunch comes, they would not. Now these are various scenarios. But ultimately then, I would say that to be moral, to be a moral human being means to follow our inner voice, and however uncomfortable it may be or however costly it may be, to be true to yourself. And to be true to yourself means many a time to compromise or to sacrifice certain things which may not be to our advantage. I want to give you some different scenarios that I was thinking of. You will have quite a few there. But it goes to show that these conflicts are generated at different levels. The conflict is not only at one singular level. And in many instances, you'll find that we are conflicted very often in our lives. So, for example, there is a conflict between what is legal and what is religious. You may be a doctor, for example, a physician, and you are asked to perform an abortion. Legally, you cannot say no, I don't think so. I'm not sure what the law is, but in some countries you cannot, because if you are in that field. Religiously, you cannot say yes. So what do you do in that particular scenario? Do you go ahead and perform the abortion or not? I know a friend of mine, for example, who went to Australia. We were living in Denver at that time, to study medicine. But then he realized that in order to be a doctor, he would have to touch patients of the opposite gender, sometimes look at their private parts and so on. So he gave up that profession because he felt that that was not in sync with his religious beliefs. There are sometimes cases, and we may not be involved in it directly, but at least we may be able to judge of what one should or should not do. Cases of conflict between what is moral and what is legal. And again, excuse the language, but I have to explain to you, these things are happening in Holland, for example, whereby prostitution is legal, and yet we may find it morally wrong. Now, we may not be engaged in it, but at the same time, it's a scenario that we may be confronted, or we might even contemplate. Well, in such a case, if something is moral, is it also legal? Or something is legal, is it also moral? Many a time our morals also depend on our culture, and on our upbringing, what we think is right and what we think is wrong. Between two separate individuals, people of different culture, people of different ethnicity, may think that this is the morally right thing to do, and someone says the opposite. And believe it or not, we were talking at the table, the question of embellishment. As a religious scholar, for example, as a historian, I often come up with quite a few conflicts, moral conflicts. I know that when I speak during Muharram, I can get a lot of crowd sympathies, emotions, by reciting something which I know did not happen. They are there in the books, but my conscience tells me, this you should not be reciting because it did not happen. But then I know also that by reciting it, I'll draw in more crowd. People will be more sympathetic, or people will be more endearing toward me. I'll give you an example. You have often heard that on the eve of Shami Ghariban, after the tents have been burned, Bibi Zainab was standing there guarding the children. And then suddenly she sees a man on a horse approaching. Ab aaye ho baba, kahan the aap? You heard the story? To me, it did not happen. It did not happen. Because a person who is dead could not come alive and rescue. Why didn't he come before? That was supposedly Imam Ali. I would not recite it. You'll never hear me recite it. But I've heard people who I respect very highly recite it. And it's a dilemma, a moral dilemma. Another case, and don't ask alims this because they'll probably end up lying to you about it. Alims sometimes they don't lie, they do taqiyya, whatever we call it. But people who recite majlises, who get paid, perform marriages, sometimes divorces, they get paid cash. Do you declare that cash to Revenue Canada? I shouldn't be saying it, that people who are working for Revenue Canada or who have worked for. But seriously though, what do you do? Do you then declare that money or not? Pay taxes on them? It's a small case scenario, but there are people who charge $1,000, $1,500 per majlis. So that ends up to being about $10,000, $15,000 just right there for 10 nights of Muharram, and so on. So there are very different scenarios. I think ultimately, and I want to end with this, I don't want to go into great details. Ultimately, as I say, we have to listen to our conscience. Because our conscience is that inner voice through which Allah speaks to us. We can kill that conscience, we can ignore it, but in reality, we cannot deny it. It is there. In many ways, when we kill the conscience, we're killing our own selves, our inner self. A person who is truly God-loving is a person who lives with a clear conscience. In other words, he or she listens to what is inside, and to the extent that what is inside becomes what is the outside. Wassalamu alaikum.